What up, what up? Welcome back to the channel, and as always, thank you all for watching. So this week, we're joined by Ashley, Will, and Cliff, so you know we got a good game going on. So in the meantime, I'm gonna go ahead and talk about these opening hands, and you do me a solid, hit the YouTube algorithm stuff down below, and we'll roll into what's in everybody's starting hands. Ashley's playing the partner pairing of Halana Keswick Ranger and Alena Keswick Trapper. Her opening hand has a Lair of the Hydra, a Forest, a Selvala Heart of the Wilds, a Mountain, an Archetype of Aggression, a Beast Within, and a Gwenna Eyes of Gaia. Cliff is playing Prosper Tomebound, and his opening hand has a Goldspan Dragon, a Swamp, a Rakdos Carnarium, an Unlicensed Disintegration, a Valky God of Lies, a Hex, and a Foreboding Ruins. Will is playing Araumi of the Dead Tide, and his opening hand has an Attunement, a Dimir Signet, a Felwar Stone, a Morphic Pool, a Temple of Deceit, a Worm Coil Engine, and an Astral Dragon. I'll be playing my Mishra Eminent 1 deck. My starting hand has a Swamp, a Steam Vents, a Talisman of Dominance, a Mycosynth Gardens, a Thunderhawk Gunship, a Voltaic Construct, and a Mystic Forge. Ashley starts us off by playing Lair of the Hydra and passes the turn. Cliff plays a Swamp, and then he'll pass the turn to Will. Will plays a Temple of Deceit. He'll scry 1, and then pass it over to me. I'll drop a Steam Vents tapped, and I'll pass the turn. Ashley plays a Mountain. Then she'll cast Soul Ring. She'll use that mana to cast Gwenna Eyes of Gaia. Gwenna taps to add 2 mana in any combination of colors. That mana can only be used to cast creature spells or activate abilities of creatures. Whenever Ashley casts a creature spell with power 5 or greater, she'll put a +1/+1 counter on Gwenna. And after that, she'll pass the turn over to Cliff. Cliff plays a Rakdos Carnarium, having to pick up his Swamp. He'll discard a Hex and give the turn to Will. Will shocks in a Watery Grave, which he'll use to cast a Dimir Signet before passing it to me. I'll play a Swamp as my land for turn, then I'll cast Talisman of Dominance and pass it over to Ashley. She will play a Forest, then out comes her first commander pairing, Alena Keswick Trapper. This half of the dynamic duo has first strike. Alena can also be tapped to add an amount of red mana equal to the greatest power among creatures Ashley controls that entered the battlefield this turn. That's all she'll do here. Cliff plays a Foreboding Ruins, revealing a Swamp so it enters untapped before passing to Will. Will is going to start with a Swamp. Then he'll cast Felwar Stone. After that, he taps out to cast Attunement. It's an enchantment which can be returned to its owner's hand to draw 3 cards and discard 4 cards. In a deck looking to fill up the graveyard, that's a pretty good deal. It'll be my turn from there. I'll play Mycosynth Gardens. After that, I'll tap out to cast Mystic Forge, which allows me to look at the top card of my library and cast artifact spells from the top of my library. I can also tap it, lose 1 life, and exile the top card of my library. I'll look at the top card and pass the turn. Ashley plays a Mountain. She'll cast Alena's partner, Halana Keswick Ranger. Halana has reach, and whenever another creature enters the battlefield under Ashley's control, she can pay 2 generic mana to have that creature deal damage equal to its power to target creature. After that, she casts Selvala Heart of the Wilds. Whenever another creature enters the battlefield, its controller may draw a card if it has the highest power on the entire battlefield. For a green and a tap, Ash can add X mana in any combination of colors where X is the greatest power among creatures she controls. After that, she'll tap Alena for 3 mana, thanks to Halana's 3 power, to cast Archetype of Aggression, which gives all of her creatures trample and takes trample away from her opponents. After setting her board up for a crazy turn 5, she'll pass it over to Cliff. Cliff plays a Swamp. He'll tap out to cast his commander, Prosper Tomebound. Whenever he casts a spell from exile, he gets a treasure token. Prosper lets him exile a card at the beginning of his end step. He's able to play that exile card until his next end step. As he goes to move to his end step, Will returns his Attunement to his hand, so he'll draw 3 cards and discard 4. He discards a Doomwake Giant, an Astral Dragon, the Attunement, and a Wormcoil Engine. Cliff moves to his instep and exiles a Tainted Peak and pass the turn. Will plays a Morphic Pool. He'll cast Mesmeric Orb, so whenever a permanent becomes untapped, that permanent's controller has to mill a card, or in Will's case, gets to mill a card. Then his commander, Araumi of the Dead Tide, makes an appearance. Such a cool commander. He can tap Araumi and exile cards from his graveyard equal to the number of opponents he has to give a creature in his graveyard Encore. Encore reads exile the creature card and pay its mana cost. For each opponent, create a token copy that attacks that opponent this turn if able. They gain haste and has to be sacrificed at the beginning of the next end step. He'll give the turn to me from there. I mill Watery Grave, Arcane Denial, Quark Clan Ironworks, and Mycosynth Wellspring. I look at the top card before drawing for turn. One more look. Okay, I play a Lava Glide Pathway. Feeling left out, I go ahead and cast my commander, Mishra, Eminent One. At the beginning of combat on my turn, I create a token that's a copy of a target non-creature artifact named Mishra Warform. Mishra Warform is a 4/4 artifact creature in addition to its other types. It gains haste and has to be sacrificed at the beginning of the next end step. I move to combat, making a Mishra Warform copy of my talisman. I'll send my 4/4 at will and he doesn't block, taking the damage. I sacrifice it and pass the turn. Ashley mills an Explorer, a Soul Guide Lantern, a land, an Augur of Autumn, another land, and a Luca Bound to Ruin. She plays a mountain, then she casts Beast Within, targeting Will's Mesmeric Orb, destroying it and giving him a 3/3 beast. After that, she'll cast Aggressive Mammoth because you can never have too much trample. Because the Mammoth is the biggest creature, she'll draw a card from Selvala. Also, because the Mammoth is an 8/8, she'll have enough mana to tap her commander for an Etali Primal Storm. Etali needs no introduction. After that, she'll pass the turn, remembering to untap Gwenna and putting a +1/+1 counter on them. Cliff plays the Tainted Peak, making a treasure token. Then he'll cast Goldspan Dragon. It's got flying and haste. Whenever it attacks or becomes the target of a spell, he creates a treasure token, and all of his treasures sacrifice for 2 mana. He moves to combat and sends the Goldspan at Ashley, who blocks with Halana. Her commander dies and Cliff gets a treasure token. Then he'll cast Inspiring Statuary, giving his non-artifact spells improvise so he can tap artifacts to pay for generic mana costs. He moves to his instep and exiles a swamp to prosper. Will plays a swamp. He activates his commander's ability, exiling 3 cards from his graveyard to encore out 3 Doomwake Giants. Doomwake Giant gives all creatures his opponent's control -1/-1 when it or another enchantment enters the battlefield. The Giants all see each other, so our creatures all get -9/-9, and that's going to be a one-sided board wipe. He moves to combat and sends 1 giant at me, 1 giant at Ashley, 1 giant at Cliff, and the beast token at Ashley. We take our damage, he moves to his instep and sacrifices the Doomwake Giants. At his instep, I tap Mystic Forge and pay 1 life to exile Inventor's Fair from the top of my library. I take a gander, then I start my turn by playing Scalding Tarn, cracking it to fetch up a basic island. I'll tap out to cast Thunderhawk Gunship. It's a vehicle with crew 2, and on ETB I get 2 2/2 Astartes Warrior creature tokens with Vigilance, and whenever it attacks, all my attacking creatures get flying until the end of turn. I'll make my tokens, look at the top card, and pass the turn. Ashley recasts her commander, Alena, then she plays Skarg the Rage Pits before passing it to Cliff. Cliff starts by casting Jessica's Will targeting me, choosing to get 5 red mana. Then he'll recast his commander Prosper. He plays a Swamp from exile. This gets him a treasure token. After that, he'll cast Galvanic Relay. He exiles the top card of his library. During his next turn, he can play that card, but this card has Storm, so he'll copy it for each spell he's cast this turn. He'll exile a Swamp, a Seize the Spoils, and 2 Mountains, one of which is from his Prosper End Step trigger. Will plays a Sunken Hollow right into a Masker Worm. Masker Worm gives all of his opponent's creatures -2/-2. It also has the static ability that whenever a creature an opponent controls dies, that player loses 2 life. My 2 tokens die and I lose 4. He'll pass it to me from there. I'll play an island. Then I'll tap out to recast my commander, Mishra. I move to combat and make a Mishra Warform copy of Thunderhawk Gunship. I'll get 2 Astartes Warrior tokens on ETB. I tap one of the tokens to crew the OG Gunship and then I'll send 10 damage in the air at will. I move to my end step and sacrifice a token. Ashley plays a command tower, then out comes her other commander for the second time, Halana. She'll pass it to Cliff after that. Cliff plays a mountain from exile, making a treasure token from Prosper. Then he'll cast Seize the Spoils, making another treasure. He'll discard a mountain to draw 2 cards and make another treasure. After that, he'll cast a Mind Stone. Then he'll tap the last of his treasures to cast Garapur Aether Grid. It's an enchantment that lets him tap 2 untapped artifacts to deal 1 damage to a creature or player. The cards in exile are going to be gone for good. He'll exile a Revel in Riches to Prosper and pass the turn. Will plays an island. Then he casts Buried Alive to search his library for up to 3 creature cards, put them into his graveyard, then shuffle it. He puts a Floating Dream Zubera, a Hedron Crab, and an Ashen Skin Zubera into his graveyard. He activates his commander's ability to encore the Floating Dream Zubera. When it's put into a graveyard from play, he draws a card for each Zubera put into the graveyard from play this turn. He exiles 3 cards and gets 3 copies of it. After that, he casts Ashnod's Altar. He sacrifices the 3 Zuberas to it to generate 6 colorless mana and draw himself 9 cards. He uses the mana to cast a Gilded Lotus. He'll tap the Lotus to cast Monastery Siege, choosing Khans. So, he'll draw a card and discard a card at the beginning of his draw step, in addition to his normal draw. Before he passes the turn to me, I'll tap Mystic Forge and pay 1 life to exile my Meriden Besieged. I start by taking a quick peek, cause I can. Then I'll cast Semblance Anvil, exiling Lithiform Engine so all of my artifacts cost 2 less. Then I'll cast Arcane Signet for free 99. I'll exile Metalworker. Then I'll cast Ethereum Sculptor so my artifacts cost 3 less to cast. I'll cast Ichor Wellspring, which draw me a card on ETB and when it LTBs. I'll attempt to cast Chromatic Orrery, and Will responds with a Fierce Guardianship to counter it. I'll cast a Felwar Stone, then play a Darksteel Citadel. Then I'll cast Determined Iteration. At the beginning of combat on my turn, I populate. The token created this way gains haste and is sacrificed at the beginning of the next end step. I'll move to combat and make a Mishra Warform copy of Ichor Wellspring, populating it to draw myself 2 cards. Then I'll cast Talisman of Indulgence. From there, I cast Sculpting Steel as a copy of Gilded Lotus. Lastly, I'll cast Portal to Phyrexia, making all of my opponents sacrifice 3 creatures. At the beginning of my upkeep, I put target creature card from a graveyard onto the battlefield under my control. I move to my end step, sacrifice my 2 Ichor Wellspring tokens, and draw another 2 cards. I know, I completely missed the combat part of the combat step, but haven't I done enough? Ashley recasts her commander, Halana, and moves to end step where Cliff casts a Bedevil, targeting my Portal to Phyrexia, destroying it. He'll start his turn by recasting his commander, Prosper. Then he casts Uba Mask, so whenever a player would draw a card, that player removes that card from the game face up instead. Each player may play cards they remove from the game with Uba Mask this turn. It turns all card draw into Impulse Draw. He'll move to his end step and Will casts Vampiric Tutor in response, searching for a secret card and putting it on top of his library. The Revel in Riches that Cliff exiled will go bye-bye. He'll exile Urabrask, Heretic Praetor, and pass the turn. Will exiles Incarnation Technique, then Monastery Siege triggers, so he'll exile an island and discard a swamp. He plays the island as his land, then he casts the Incarnation Technique he tutored for. He mills 5 cards and return a creature card from his graveyard to the battlefield. When he casts Incarnation Technique, he can copy it if he chooses an opponent to also copy it. He chooses Cliff to copy it. He mills 1000 Year Elixir, Wings of Rebuke, Black Market, and Thespian Stage. He chooses to return Astral Dragon. When Astral Dragon ETBs, he creates 2 tokens that are copies of target non-creature permanent except they're 3/3 dragon creatures in addition to their other types, and they have flying. He chooses Gilded Lotus, so he'll get 2 copies of it. Cliff then mills a Professional Facebreaker, a Blasphemous Act, a Marionette Master, a Swamp, and you find some prisoners. He brings back Goldspan Dragon. Then Will does his copy and mills his cards. He returns Junji the Midnight Sky. When Junji dies, Will can have each opponent discard 2 cards and lose 2 life, or he can return a non-dragon creature from his graveyard to the battlefield and lose 2 life. After that, he'll recast his commander, Araumi, and pass the turn to me. I'm gonna exile the land on top of my library with Mystic Forge. Then I'll Impulse draw a Marionette Master. I'll cast Liquid Metal Torque. Then I'll cast the Marionette Master that I exiled. It has Fabricate 3, meaning I can have it ETB with 3 +1/+1 counters or 3 1/1 servo creatures. Whenever an artifact I control is put into a graveyard from the battlefield, target opponent loses life equal to Marionette Master's power. I choose the 3 counters on ETB. Then I'll cast Tezzeret, Master of the Bridge. It enters with 5 counters and gives my creatures and planeswalkers affinity for artifacts. Its +2 deals X damage to each opponent and gains X life, where X is the number of artifacts I control. -3 to return an artifact from my graveyard to my hand. -8 to exile the top 10 cards of my library and put all artifact cards from among them onto the battlefield. I'll move to combat and make Mishra Warform copies of Ichor Wellspring. I get to Impulse draw 2 more cards on ETB. I take a peek and then cast Tezzeret's Gatebreaker. When it ETBs, I look at the top 5 cards of my library. I get a blue or artifact card from among them into my hand. I look at the top 5 and reveal a Fierce Guardianship and I put it in my hand. I'll play the Sunken Ruins, then I'll use Tezzeret's +2, dealing 15 damage to the table and gaining 15 life. I move to my end step, sacrificing my 2 tokens and triggering Marionette Master. I send that 8 damage to Will to take him out of the game. He responds by sacrificing Junji to return Mascaworm to play, which kills my Ethereum Sculptor and my 2 tokens before he's taken out of the game. I take 6 damage and send 4 damage at Ashley. She responds with a deflecting swat, so I take 4 damage and she starts her turn. Ashley impulse draws a Vivian Monster's Advocate. She'll cast the Planeswalker. It enters with 3 loyalty and lets her look at and cast creatures from the top of her library. +1 to create a 3/3 beast with Vigi, Reach, or Trample. -2 says when she casts her next creature, she can search for a creature with less mana value and put it onto the battlefield. She'll take a peek and cast Atsushi the Blazing Sky from the top. Atsushi has Flying and Trample, and when it dies, she can exile the top 2 cards of her library and play them until the end of her next turn, or she can create 3 treasure tokens. She'll activate Vivian's +1 and create a 3/3 beast with Reach before passing the turn to Cliff. He impulse draws an Arcane Signet. He casts the Arcane Signet, making a treasure. Then he sacrifices his Mind Stone to draw himself a card. It draws him Author of Shadows. He casts Author of Shadows. On ETB, it exiles all opponents' graveyards. He can choose and cast a non-creature card exiled this way. He attempts to cast My Chromatic Ori, which I counter with Fierce Guardianship. He'll move to combat and send Goldspan Dragon at me. I'll tap Mishra to crew Thunderhawk Gunship and block the Goldspan. Cliff responds to declare blockers by casting Unlicensed Disintegration, destroying my vehicle and dealing 3 damage to me. After combat, he'll cast Valki, God of Lies. We reveal our hands and he exiles my Voltaic Construct. That'll end his turn. I'll tap my Liquid Metal Torque, making Tezzeret an artifact which I'll make a Mishra Warform copy of. I'll populate that token, 1 will die to Legend Rule, so I'll send 4 damage at Cliff. I'll plus both of my Tezzerets, draining the table for a total of 26 damage and taking the win. Hope you enjoyed the gameplay this week. We are 4 subscribers away from the big 3 hundo, so please take a second, hit that subscribe button so you don't miss out on any future videos. And until next time, I'll see you at the table.